Today we are going to do edging for our face frame. So we have a carcass here with clamps all over it. This is from period 4. So this is what we're going to accomplish this period, is a carcass with edging on it. So we've got our carcass that you guys recognize that you put together, and then we've got some edging. So we've got edging on the sides, we call those stiles, and edging across the front, we call those rails. So we're going to cover up all that ugly plywood and make it look real nice. So first things first, we're going to take off our clamps from yesterday. So I don't remember whose project this is, but here it is. The top edging glued. The bottom side, top side, corners, pretty nice. Just needs a little bit of sanding and we're there. So the good thing, as I said about these maple tops, is they will oil up and change color to be a little bit closer to this pre-finished birch. So our top edging is going to match really nice. So this procedure will not change. This is what I'm going to do today. I'm going to cut edging for our face frame. The numbers are going to change a little bit. Not these numbers, but this number is going to change because our length is different for our edging. So how different? Well, let's grab a random cabinet. I get it. Okay, so the numbers that are going to change are the length of our stiles and the length of our rails. So rough length of our stiles, the ones going this way, is going to be 20 inches plus 1 inch. So that's easy. Our stiles are 20 inches plus 1 inch for rough length. So we've got two different lengths here, our stiles and our rails. 21 inches for our stiles. Okay, now rails. So we've got about 13 and a half by the time I put these on. So this is a little bit easier to measure on my cabinet because these stiles aren't on here yet. These rails don't go all the way to the end, so let's measure it on mine. Actually, we can measure it from the one I just glued. So I've got 13 and a half inches. Okay, 13 and a half inches plus 1 inch is 14 and a half inches for our rails. So rails are like the rails of a fence. They go this way. Stiles go up and down. And those are going to cover up our ugly plywood. So we're going to jump into that. Again, one of the questions on your quiz was, how do we determine finished length? This doesn't change. We're going to mark finished length in place. So finished length needs to be marked in place because we want this thing to fit together perfectly with no gaps. And I can't use my measurements. I can't use my cabinet bill. I can't even use rough length minus 1 inch. What we're going to do is we're going to clamp the stiles on, and then we're going to cut the rails to fit between the two of them. That's our process for finished length. And there's one more step you're going to have to pay attention to when we get to that point. I've got 35 total. Minus 21 is 14. That means the leftover somebody can use for another project because it's over a foot. So keep these things in mind. When you go to cut out your project, if I've only got 6 inches left over, that's 6 inches of unused material. So remember, our wood has to be a foot long to go through the jointer and planer and table saw. So if I cut off my 21 and I've still got over a foot, that's a usable piece for somebody. So that's good conservation of material. So keep that in mind when you're going to select material. How much am I going to waste at the end, and is it usable by somebody else? So this is a piece for us. We measure 21, make a mark. Ooh, that's a big cut. So hopefully what I was saying earlier makes sense. Is I've got this waist piece, but it's still 13 and a half inches. Somebody can use this for their project. Maybe a drawer face, maybe some more rails. In fact, our rails are 13 and a half. If somebody's really careful, they could turn this into a bunch of rails. That would be really nice. In fact, if I was smart, get 2 stiles, get 4 stiles out of this, and 4 rails out of this. That would actually be the best use of material. Because if I got 2 stiles out of this, 2 rails out of this, I'd still have 2 rails and 2 stiles for another project. So maybe Vince's project or somebody else's, I could cut some rails and stiles for them. So in fact, let's hang on to this. It's not an extra inch. It's only an extra, 1/8 of an inch, really. Only got an extra 1/8 of an inch, but if I'm really careful, I think we can use this for some rails. So sometimes God smiles down on me and says, Joe, I'm going to make your day. And that's what he just did. So we got rough length, rails and stiles. Let's joint these suckers. So it's going to get loud. I'm going to turn on the dust collection, but you guys know how to use a jointer, so you don't have to listen to me now. I just need to move my fence back a little bit because I have a very wide piece. It's still under 8 inches, but there's wood chips all over this thing because this is plugged already from being run without the dust collection, so we got to run the dust collection. So sorry for the noise. It's got quite a wobble corner to corner, both ways. So it's going to take some doing to make it flat. If it's extreme wobble like this, I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to rip it in half. If I have extreme wobble from this corner to this corner, and I cut it in half, then I've only got a little wobble from this corner to that corner. So that's actually what I'm going to do first, is I'm going to rip this in half to try to eliminate some of that wobble, but I'll still have enough for my 2 stiles. Let's check our small piece. Okay, same thing. So I'm going to rip both of these. Now it's got too much wobble to go through the table saw. So I'm kind of glad this happened. It can show you guys what can happen if your piece has got too much wobble. You take it over to a bandsaw. It's a little bit safer to use. If something wobbles when it's going through the table saw, it's going to kick back. It's going to take your teeth out. But if something wobbles as it goes through the bandsaw will scream a little bit. It'll make a bit of a complaint, but it's not going to kick back and hit you. So that's why we're going to use a bandsaw. So what I want to determine is at least enough rough width. So 1 3/8 plus 1 3/8, enough rough width to get me where I'm going. So 1 3/8 and 1 3/8 is 2 3/4. So just to be safe, because I know I have to rejoint, I'm going to go 2 7/8. Okay, so we jointed an engine surface. We're ready to do table saw. So back to our list. We've got a rough length for both pieces. We've got a jointed edge and surface. We're now going to do rough width on the table saw, 1 3/8, and then down to the planer to get our finished with the finished like this. So this piece has a check mark on it. My waist piece does not have a check mark on it, so I need to rejoin this edge. Planer time. Okay. So I'm gonna do width first. Check mark down. So 32 millimeters or inch and a quarter is 92 on this machine. So I'm going to go right to 92 because our cut was so close. Check mark side down and send it, Billy. Check mark side down. finally set my counter to 42. Doing a nice small finish pass makes for a nice finish pass. It's a smoother cut. 42, and we're ready to go. Check mark side down. Okay, 1 1/4 by 3/4, ready to go. Okay, this is the front of our cabinet. I know it is because we've got those rabbits on the back, so I'm at the front. Now I'm ready to cut finished length. And as I said, and same as the quiz, we're going to mark finished length in place. So we're going to have to do that in place. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to grab my 2 stiles. Now, I can throw these on and I can mark them. But I've done a bunch of jointing, I've done a bunch of planing. The ends of these aren't square anymore. The rest of them is square. All these 4 sides are square, but the ends aren't necessarily square. So a good rule of thumb to get into to make sure I have 2 square ends is to square an end first, then cut finished length off the other end. Square an end first and cut finished length off the other end. So let's do that first. And you don't have to take much off just to square an end. We just want to make sure it's square, which means I take off a tiny bit and then I check mark it. That's my squared end. To double check that it's square, I can run a square along the end of it this way, nice and square. Check mark side down and mark the top to cut off. So check mark side down, I mark the top to cut off, and it should be around an inch, 1 inch. Then I'm going to take off because I added that extra inch. So I've got my stile here. It's lined up with the bottom of my gable, and I make a mark at the top to cut off, to mark in place. Line this guy up, make sure it's at the bottom of my gable. Make a mark at the top of the gable. And I'm ready to cut. So I'm going to clamp these in place, A, to get a dry fit, and B, so I can measure my rails between the 2 of them. These both need to be in place in order for me to get the perfect length for my rail that it fits just nice without any gaps. So I'm going to grab some clamps for that. I'll line up the bottom, nice and flush. And then line up the top. Go between 2 rails so my clamp's not in the way of my rails when I go to get those on. So I'm pretty happy with this fit and this fit, but I have a little gap here in the middle. So I'm going to try putting a 3rd clamp on there to close this gap. There we go. Gap dealt with. So we got a nice edge. You can see a little contrast with the darker hickory. Looks quite nice. So that's a dry fit. Let's do the other side. Be sure to drop your stile a couple of times. Get some dents in it that need to be sanded out later. That's important. Just kidding. Now I'm good on the top and the bottom, but it's bowed out a little bit this way, so this gable might be pushed in. So what I'm going to probably do is get this snug, and then I'm going to put a C-clamp in the middle to even it out. So I'm going to get that snug. I'm going to grab a little C-clamp. And I'm just going to clamp this guy flush to I need a 3rd party here. There we go. There we go. Now it's nice and flush. So these little tips and tricks of the trade here. This guy wasn't quite flush. on the outside here. So I clamped this C-clamp on here to make sure that this stile was nice and flush to this gable. So if you do have those little protrusions, sometimes a little clamp helps. And that's why we do these dry fits. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to glue this one on, and we're going to leave this one dry fit, and we're going to cut these rails to fit. Leaving this one unglued gives me a little wiggle room to fit these in just right. But this one we might as well glue in because he's not going anywhere. We can leave him in to stay. A nice little light piece at the bottom there. Plus he's the trickier one, so let's get him glued first. So another one of the questions from your quiz. I got my paper underneath. I got my clamps. I got my glue and paper towel. G to G. Okay. All right, halfway with that. That. I'm only going to glue. It's also, I have to glue on 3 pieces at once next. I'm going to have to do 2 rails in one stile. So by gluing this one on, it takes away a little bit of the effort later. It saves me a little bit of time for my next gluing if I can get this glued right away. So having this style glued on ahead of time is a good thing. Like I say, this plywood eats up a lot of glue, so get it rubbed in, let it soak up a little bit before you put your stile on. There. You're gonna go on there. Which is good. Okay, so one stile done. Now these guys are already dry fit. We can cut these rails in place. So one of the questions in the quiz, how do you determine finished length? Get your stiles mocked up and then cut your rails to fit. So we got our 2 rails here. So I got some nice, it's a nice color, a little light dark, light dark. We'll put this light dark one here, I think, and the light one on top because it's mostly going to be hidden anyways. You can't really see these a whole ton. Dark light, light to dark, whatever you want to do there. Okay, so the big thing is I haven't squared these ends yet, so I'm going to square these other ends and then I'm going to chop them to length. Did Lyra show up yet?
Hello, I got lost.
You're what?
I got lost online. I don't know how, but I did it.
Oh, I'm glad you're here.
Cap.
Recap.
Okay, so this line is marked in place. I'm not going to cut right to that line. If I cut right to this line, I know it's going to be short because my pencil doesn't mark exactly where I need to go. It marks kind of beside where I need to go. So I don't want to cut to the pencil mark. So when you mark these in place, do not cut to the pencil mark. You need to cut beside the pencil mark if you're going to mark in place. And that's why when we cut pieces that need to fit together really well, we always cut them long, and then we can always cut them a little shorter if we need to. But if you cut them too short, your life is over. Well, you're not life is over. You're going to have gaps in your cabinet because I'm not giving you new ones. So I'm going to cut these so they just fit. So the top one, I remember, is the lighter one. I throw that guy on top, and look at that. I left the pencil mark in a little bit. Dang. Look at that. Didn't have to change a thing, guys. So that's why you want to keep these long, because it fits, okay? So you want to keep these cuts long, especially when you mark in place, because you kind of have to account for the thickness of the pencil lead even, right? Because your pencil doesn't mark right beside your piece. It marks a little bit away from the edge of your piece, okay? Okay, so hopefully Andrea is okay with that look. We got our 2 rails. We're going to glue those in. So let's do a dry fit. Okay, you'll notice, or maybe you didn't, that when I glue these rails, I'm going to glue them to the bottom of the web frame on the top one and the top of the web frame on the bottom one. Why? Because I need to maintain this 4-inch width for my drawer. If I glue this to the top of this to the bottom of my web frame, I'm going to close this gap a little bit. But you don't want that. Okay? So when I dry fit yours, just make sure you maintain this 4-inch opening for your drawer. Okay, dry fit, we're happy with it. Minimal gaps. No gaps when we can avoid them. And we're ready to rock. Again, the top of this, even this being even isn't super important because our top edging is going to cover that. So that's the beauty of this, is we just want to maintain this 4-inch opening, even if these don't line up perfectly. More importantly, I'm going to line this up with my web frame. So now I'm ready to glue. I need to glue my stile and I need to glue my 2 rails. So I'm going to have to work quickly. And then this class is going to be done. So we are just about there, folks. Thanks for hanging in there. Okay, there we go. Okay, so she's done. You got 2 stiles and 2 rails. So you guys are welcome to go and do your quiz. Hi, Nicholas. That's nice, Miguel. The quiz is, like I say, very similar to yesterday, so you should be fine to ace it. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. And we'll see you tomorrow to make some drawers. Thanks for sticking around. You guys are an awesome group. I've had lots of groups of 20s that gave me gray hairs and drove me nuts. But you guys are by far the coolest group. So thanks so much for your time and for sticking around.